right, it is good to see you here this morning. If you have your Bibles, if you would, turn to Exodus chapter 19. And as you're turning to Exodus 19, we want to welcome those who are watching at our Lakeside campus, those who are joining us online. Let's give them a big welcome. I want to welcome and thank you guys for being with us. Look, the reason we showed the baptism video is we want to celebrate those who have been baptized in the last couple of weeks and months. And today our message is going to talk about our need to share the gospel with those around us. We're in a sermon series entitled Be the Church. And we're talking about the fact that as we gather here today, we gather as the church, but that we will leave here to go and be the church every place that we go. And as we go out to be the church, what we understand is, yes, we're to go and love others and to serve others and to be an example for Christ. But if we do all of that and we never get around to sharing the gospel, then we've really missed the mark. That a part of what we need to do when we go out is we need to tell people about the hope that we have, and we need to let them know that they can know Jesus in the same way that we know him, that their sins can be forgiven. And so we're going to talk today about being the church that shares Jesus with those around us. But before we do that, I want to talk about something that's coming this fall. We began the church year with a sermon series called Break Free, and we talked about the fact that as followers of Christ, that you can walk in freedom. You were created to walk in freedom. That you can be free from the guilt of your sin. You can be free from that, whatever it is, that stronghold in your life, that God will give us victory over that. And we talked about walking in freedom. And one of the things we talked about was financial freedom. What would it look like if this was the year you started the road to financial freedom? Well, we want to strategically do something about that. So in September, we're going to do a 10-week program called Financial Peace, where as a church together for 10 weeks, we're going to start the process of being financially free. Just to show you why this is important, I want to illustrate it through some candy bars. So let's throw the first candy bar up here this morning. And by the way, at Lakeside here, if this is your favorite candy bar, you can applaud, okay? We need to know. The first is payday bars. Any payday people in the room? All right, not many. All right, so here's the thing. Doesn't have chocolate. Why call it a candy bar if it doesn't have chocolate? So the payday bar represents 2% of Americans that are millionaires. 2% of Americans are millionaires, which means they have net assets of over $1 million. They don't have debt, maybe a mortgage, but they don't have debt. They're saving for retirement. Financially, they have some money in the bank. That's 2% of Americans. The next bar is the 100 grand bar. All right, anybody like 100 grand? A couple, all right, just a few. This represents 10% of Americans who are debt-free. Now, 10% of Americans are debt-free. The only debt they owe is possibly their mortgage. They've got some money in the bank. They're kind of saving for retirement, and that they're financially, fiscally responsible. Now, understand, between the first two bars, we've talked about 12% of Americans who are debt-free, have a little bit of money in the bank, saving for retirement. That's 12% of Americans. The next is the Nestle Crunch Bar. Anybody? Okay. Yeah, we're getting a chocolate here, right? Understand this. These are those who are feeling the crunch financially. And here, 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, you may think that you're doing okay financially because you're keeping your head above the water. You also feel normal because this is normal in America. Let me tell you what's normal in America. Normal in America is an average of $30,000 of consumer debt. That means without the mortgage, you're in debt at least $30,000. Normalism in America means that I'm going to retire with less than $15,000 in the bank. Normal in America is that if in July the AC goes out and you call the repairman and he comes and he says, I can fix it for $1,000, here's what normal is. 75% of the people in America who make $50,000 or less wouldn't have $1,000 to give him to fix the AC. They would have to put it on their credit card. And so what about those between 50 and 100,000? You'd think, well, surely they have it. 68% of Americans with between $50 and $100,000 wouldn't have $1,000 saved up to pay the AC repairman. And even 100,000 and over, almost 40% wouldn't have $1,000 emergency fund to have the AC fixed. That's normal in America, and that's not free, and that's no way to live. And yet that's where we are in America. The next one is the milk dud, okay? That's the next one. And I don't guess that's candy bar, that's candy, but this represents 2% of Americans who are extremely behind on their payments and wondering if they're going to be able to ever dig their way out financially. And then the last category is 16%, and we're calling those the zero bars, okay? And this 16% are either in bankruptcy or they're very close to bankruptcy. This 16% has an average of $2,500 a month in interest alone that they're trying to pay. All right, but understand that this category is bigger than the first two categories combined. And that's the state of what we are in financially in America. In fact, look at the next slide. It'll kind of sum it up for you. So 12% are debt-free and living large. 70% are really under a financial crunch. And if you were to lose a paycheck, you would feel it. A couple of paychecks, you might end up in one of these other categories. And so then you have 18% who financially, you're just done. I mean, you're just struggling in your finances. Let me just say this. This is not God's will. And we want to, as a church in September, my desire is that we're all 100% up here. Because here's what I know. For the most part, the reason people are down here, for the most part, it's not because of an income issue. It's because of a spending issue, which, by the way, one of the big 10 says, thou shalt not covet. And much of what we will learn in those 10 weeks that get us out of this is that there are things that we have we don't really need, that we can get out of debt. And by the way, once you get out of debt, then you can afford to do those things. And so be praying about that. And I got to tell you, I am so excited about it. Here's why I'm excited about it. By going through this, we're going to save marriages. Because money is one of the leading issues that leads to divorce in America. It may not be the number one, but it brings strains in marriages. Here's a statistic just came out. A couple with $10,000 in consumer debt is twice as likely to get a divorce as a couple who has $10,000 in the bank. So just understand that by doing this, we'll save marriages. Secondly, we want to help young people coming up. I am counseling young people for marriage. They're coming into the room, and between student loans and credit card debts, they're going into a marriage with $150,000 and $200,000 in debt. Going into a marriage. By the way, $100,000 in debt's kind of normal today, going into a marriage if they have student loans. Just think of all the work just to dig out from that. They don't have a house. That's not car payments or anything. That's just debt. And we want to teach them that there's a way that you don't have to do that. And then the third is we want for you to have freedom so that you have opportunity. A lot of people have told me, I'd love to go on a mission trip, but I just can't afford it. Love to go to Israel, just can't afford it. I've got a heart for this cause over here. I'd love to be involved in that, just can't afford it. Why? Because you've been deceived and you're giving all your money to Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. I would love to tick off all of the credit card companies. Not because we didn't pay, but because we didn't need them anymore. Would that be awesome as a church? And so in the fall, just know that that's coming. We're in the process now of kind of recruiting teams for that. So if somebody talks to you about it, you'll know what's coming. All right, I ask you to turn to Exodus chapter 19. And as we're in this series called Be the Church, today what I want us to understand is this one concept. God has always used his people to share his message with the world. So God chooses his people to share his message with the world. As we pick up this story in Exodus chapter 19, you've got the Israelites, and they're about to receive the 10 Commandments. They're 3 months out of captivity in Egypt. They're at the base of Mount Sinai, and Moses is going to get basically the marching orders from God for what their nation should do. Now understand this, they entered into Egypt as a family of Jacob. They came out of it as a nation, a couple million people as a nation of Israel. Moses leads them out. Over the last 3 months, this nation has seen God do some amazing things. They saw God part the waters as they went through on dry land, and then to let the waters come and destroy Pharaoh's army. One time they needed water, and there was some water there, but it was bitter. They just couldn't drink it. And so God told Moses, take this stick over here and just toss it in the water. And God used that act of faith to make the water clean and pure, and it was like spring water. They watched as God performed that miracle. They ate manna every day that God provided, and they ate quail that God provided, so they had the meat and the bread. Another time they needed water, and God told Moses, strike the rock with your rod, and it became a spring, and spring water started coming out of the rock. All of those things they've already experienced. They're now at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to get the marching orders for the nation, and as we pick up in verse 3, look at what happens. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the house of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all of the nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you're to speak to the Israelites. Verse 6 there, that last verse, you are to be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That was God's calling on Israel. Now, we've talked about what it means to be holy. The biblical word holy means to be set apart for special use. And so God is saying, as a nation, I am setting you apart for special use. Well, what is that special use? To be a kingdom of priests. Now, to understand that, in your notes, look at the definition of a priest. A priest is a representative of the deity that he serves or that she serves. And so here's what God is saying. You are to be, as a nation, my representatives to the world. You're a holy nation set apart. And when the world wants to know who God is, they should look at you as a nation. And through our covenant relationship, they should get a glimpse of what God looks like. The nation of Israel was really the evangelist of the day that pointed people, other nations and other people, to God. Now, as we know, sometimes they did that well, but many times they were just horrifically bad at other seasons of life and other seasons in their history. You say, okay, Chuck, well, that's good, but that's Old Testament and that's a nation. What does that have to do with us being the church? Glad you asked. Look at the top of your notes. 1 Peter 2:9. But you, when Peter's talking here, who's he talking to? You. He's talking to the church. He's talking to everyone who professes faith in Jesus Christ. So he's talking to you, and he says, here's the deal. You are a royal priesthood, a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. The same commission that God gave the nation of Israel, that you're to be my representatives to the world, he now gives to the church and says, it is your job now to be, as my chosen people, to be my representatives to the world. So he says, you're a holy nation. We're a nation not bound by ethnicity, but we're a nation bound by our citizenship in heaven. And that we are a holy nation, and that you are a priest. Now, let me ask you this. What does it feel like to know you're a priest or a priestess? It's whatever a woman is, all right? That God calls you priests, and that you are a priest. Your job is to represent God well to the world, because the world is watching you. In fact, I would kind of sum up 1 Peter 2:9 by saying this in our context. You are the church. As the church, go and be the church by representing God well and by pointing people to God. So whenever we say be the church, it's not a slick marketing ploy. It's a biblical mandate. Whenever I go to my car and I see that B magnet, it's a reminder that no matter where my car brings me today, I am to be the church every place that I go, because the world is watching. And they want to know what Jesus is like by looking at your life. Real quick, 2 quick B magnet stories. I heard them this week. They're too good to pass up. The first is we have a great lady at our Lakeside campus. She's probably mid-70s. She was telling me last week, she said, I was walking out of the bank and there was a young man stealing my B sticker. He opened up his car and he chunked it in there. And I could just see her doing this. She went and confronted him, So what are you doing stealing my B sticker? He tried to deny it, finally got embarrassed, got in his car and drove off. I don't know why he stole the B sticker, right? Maybe it was his initials. Maybe his name was Bruce Edwards or Billy. I don't know, right? Maybe but let me tell you, you've arrived when they're stealing your sticker, okay? So, because as she was telling the story, a couple other people were saying, mine was stolen too. So that's one thing. But here's another one. We had a lady in our church who was involved in some ministry last week that went kind of late here at the church. And on her way home, she stopped by Twisty Treat, which we all would acknowledge is a religious experience, right? And so she stopped at Twisty Treat, and she's in the drive-through line, and she noticed a guy in the car behind her getting out and walking to her car. Well, she's, immediately she's freaking out, and she's going, well, there's enough of people around here. If I scream, I'm okay, or whatever, right? The guy comes and taps on her window. She rolls her window down, and he goes, I saw your B magnet. We go to the same church. Guess what? I'm buying your ice cream for you, okay? And so here's the deal. Get your B magnet and you get free ice cream. That's just, or you may get it stolen. Either way, you have a story, okay? As we talk about being the church, real quick in your notes, let's talk about 3 ways that we're called to be the church. First of all, through your everyday actions, you're called to be the church. The way you live your life matters. People are looking at you, and they want to know that your faith makes a difference. In fact, I came across this. It's a pastor's blog, and he said this. He said, I don't cuss, I don't smoke, I don't steal, I don't commit adultery, I don't covet or take God's name in vain. I don't dance very well. I don't watch porn. I don't take drugs. I don't gamble. I don't do these things for one simple reason. The people I know and love don't think that I would do them. And I find a deep kind of wholeness being who people think that I am. Other people are keepers of my reputation, and my reputation makes my influence possible. I love that. Look at 1 Peter 2:12. Here's what Peter admonishes us. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day that he visits us. People are looking at your life and they want to know if your faith matters. And let me say this, the evangelistic tool of today is won by influence and not by intellect. People care far more how you live than what you know. And especially in a day of moral relativism when nobody wants to be told what to do or they really don't even believe in an absolute truth. They don't want anybody to put any kind of constraints on them, but they are watching others. Poll came out Friday that somewhere between 60 and 70% of Americans think that both of the leading presidential candidates are morally bankrupt. Now, what hit me about that poll is even though we don't want anybody to judge our morality, we're very quick to judge somebody else's. And that being the case, when we live godly lives, it will be attractive to the world and provide a bridge for us to share the gospel. Secondly, we need to be the church through the storms of life. That the way that you handle the storms of life will tell the world your true faith in God. And let me tell you, if they're looking at your life normally, they are focused and lasered in whenever you're going through a storm. And the way you handle that storm is a testimony to God. In fact, here's what Paul said about this. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our troubles. So whenever I'm going through the storm, I go to God through the Holy Spirit. He brings me comfort, but for a reason. Look at it. So that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. That when they go through storms, that gives me an incredible opportunity to share my faith with them as I come alongside them and say, I'm going to walk through this storm with you. And we earn the right to share the gospel. For just as the sufferings of Christ flow into our lives, so also through Christ, our comfort overflows to others. People are watching you through those crises, health, relational, financial, whatever it is. And when we trust God through it, the way we live through that provides us an opportunity to share Christ with others. And then a third one is this. By being the church, we need to share Christ with others through investing in the next generation. Psalm 145:4 says this, one generation will commend your works to another, and they will tell of your mighty acts. This one's important and huge today because many Christians aren't strategically thinking about the next generation. Or if they are, they have no clue what to do because of technology. It seems like every generation is speaking a different language. But there's three things that we need to do for the next generation. Number one, we need to pray for them. They're facing a world that some of us have never known. We need to pray for the next generation. We need to be available for the next generation. Older couples mentoring younger couples, older men, older women, younger women. We need to be available for them. And then thirdly, we need to empower them. They are the best people to reach their generation. And we need to empower our young people to do that. And let me just say this, young people, don't wait for us to come to you. You come to us and say, here's what God's calling me to do. Amen, let's do it. And let's empower them. Let me finish with this from Psalm 78. The psalmist said, we will not hide the truths of God from our children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, of his power and the wonders he has done, so that the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands.